You know what? No build-up at all. The Pegasus was a mistake and should never have been included in the form we got. It screams of the writers adding something in the same way it was done in the original, mostly, without actually thinking about how the tone and themes of the remastered series had changed, or what the situation was with the story and characters going forward, resulting in a satisfying, infuriating final battle that pissed off the entire fan base for years. Generic greetings, and welcome to Science Insanity, channel dedicated to bringing my love of science fiction to you, the viewer, and the third time I'm re-editing and recording this because I just couldn't figure out a way to politely step on this absolute landmine of a topic I wanted to talk about. Today, we are discussing the Pegasus Problem, and why I believe the ship's destruction was not only inevitable due to a number of real and in-universe reasons, but also how the reason it was hated was due to the piss-poor execution, not the actual content of the episode. Oh boy, I can't wait to read the comments. But you know what, I'm like Emperor Palpatine if he wasn't a living ballsack. Your hate only makes me stronger and more eager to make you mad. Now, you might be wondering, how could I possibly back up such a stance when the Pegasus arriving to the fleet is one of the best moments in the show, and the titular episode Pegasus, as well as the Resurrection Ship 1 and 2, were some of the most popular episodes in the entire show? Well, buckle up, because we have 3 angles to cover on this, then why I think the way it was handled was a mistake, more so than anything else. Firstly, the real-life production of the show, including cast, set, and financial reasons. Number 2, in-universe reasons like, oh, I don't know, the title of the show perhaps playing a part in which ship got to live. And number 3, the story and tone issues the Pegasus creates. And finally, going over the real problem at the core of the Pegasus and why it was handled so incredibly poorly in the show. But first, new year, new goals, and while the channel didn't hit the 20k milestone by the end of 2023, we are so goddamn close. So if you enjoy the video, leave a like, drop a sub, ring the bell, and all of that, since it really does help fight the algorithm, especially for smaller channels like this. If you want to support us directly, we have a Patreon, or if you want to join a small but growing community of turbo nerds, we have a Discord. Everything linked in the description below. And if this video makes you really, really angry, remember, unsubscribing is just as free, and I won't apologize for it. And with that, let's get into the video. First off, the most compelling and I guess driest reason for why the Pegasus wasn't long for this world. When the Pegasus arrived, it was a beacon of hope in an otherwise often oppressively stressful and downtrodden show. It was one of the first moments of unquestionable hope and a ray of light that had no tinge of death or failure or Pyrrhic victory to it. But the issue with that is it raises questions and scenarios that are pretty much impossible to answer so long as it's hanging around. For example, the Pegasus simply has too much utility. With its fabrication arrays, the Pegasus could not only produce, operate, and maintain Viper Mark 7s, but could most likely easily be retooled to fabricate everything from other small craft like Raptors to ammunition and weapon systems, potentially up to and including parts for other large ships like engines and armor. The fact that the fabrication bays on the Pegasus are pretty much never brought up outside of references and background stuff is because they're Pandora's box. Once you use them to solve a single problem of resources or materiel, that's it. Every single other issue that isn't food or water becomes an issue of stupidity, not capacity. For example, if the Pegasus hung around long enough, what would stop it from fabricating new armor panels and guns for the Galactica, try to get it back up to some level of fighting fitness? Because remember, the Pegasus ate a nuke escaping the Scorpio shipyards, and they state that the ship underwent repairs. So the Mercury is obviously capable of making the components and parts to repair the outer armor and inner structure of the ship itself. But let's move from its capabilities onto plot points it would have entirely ruined just by existing. Spoilers. By the way, I guess, how old is this? Does that even you know what? It's fine. It doesn't matter. The show is really old. Spoilers, whatever. When Gaeta and Zarek launched a mutiny aboard the Galactica, it was only possible because the Pegasus wasn't there and the rebel base star was. If Rosalind had fled to an intact and loyalist Pegasus, what would Gaeta and Zarek have done? Die screaming as the Pegasus ripped the Galactica apart with gunfire? Die begging as the Pegasus Marines assisted the loyalists on Galactica to execute the traitors? Or would they perhaps have attempted to bargain their way into a better political position rather than just using force because nobody wants to fight the beast? Moreover, what about the Cylon Civil War? The Rebel base star not only played a huge part in the Battle of the Hub, but went on to add a huge amount of vital technology to the fleet, like the Cylon's upgraded FTL drives, and hoo boy, did that cause a lot of drama that was fun to watch unfold on screen. It also laid the groundwork for the human-Cylon War to come to an end with the destruction of the colony, liberation of the Centurions, and unity between the skin jobs and humans on Earth. If the Colonials still had the Pegasus, would they have bothered working with the Cylons, or would they have immediately nuked the hell out of them just to be safe once the battle was over? I feel like a lot of the storytelling and ideas we got from Season 3, 4, and 5 that came after the Pegasus were great and would have been entirely undermined by the ship still being around, or would have been outright impossible without really assassinating the characters in the writing. And while I generally don't like getting too pretentious, it's also important to say, and kind of relevant, that Chekhov's gun has a second half to the saying. But the second part, which is often forgotten, is that once the gun goes off, once it's fulfilled its purpose, it should be removed from the story. The storyline with Chief Tyrol and how people were essentially raising their kids to fill their own role in the fleet was really cool to see in an episode, and does raise a lot of genuine questions about how a society would survive, how you would pass on your skills, and even if it's ethically or morally acceptable to do so in a modern society when, for thousands of years past, giving your skills to your children was the way that people lived their lives. And that was a great episode, but it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it would be really annoying if that kind of thing kept coming up or those issues kept presenting themselves. So once the storyline was resolved, they just left it in the past to move on. The Pegasus did what it was supposed to, and once it had overstayed its welcome, it had to be removed. Next point, consistency with the original series, as well as concerns about money, casting, and production issues from the people in charge. While it was never going to sink the series, the remastered BSG was far more popular and, far more importantly, way more successful than the original was after all. Let's not forget that production costs and ballooning expenses are what killed the original, and it's often a producer's job to cut costs, shave unneeded scenes, and slap directors around to keep things in line and not running off into the weeds. It's an unfortunate fact that the Pegasus sets, props, and a lot of the cast were simply on the chopping block. They weren't coming back. And for the link to the original series, anyone who hasn't seen it, the Pegasus shows up there as well, captained by another version of Kane, and in a similar result, the Pegasus is lost. Not destroyed outright, but actually lost, left behind, abandoned, disappeared after a battle, that kind of thing. In the remastered series, they copied most of the main beats, but had a different execution of actually destroying the ship, because from a real-life production side, there just wasn't really any intent or will to bring the ship back after that. As depressing as it sounds, it was always the plan to get rid of the ship from a story writing and real-life organization angle. And finally, for the third reason that the ship was just doomed, killing off the Galactica was a non-starter. It was never going to happen. The namesake of the show and a huge part of the show's mythos and feel was just too important to let go. The Galactica may have been nicknamed the Bucket, but it was both far more integral to the story than the Pegasus was, and, dare I say, had a hell of a lot more character than the Pegasus did. The way the Pegasus was portrayed and the characters on it was as a military's military vessel of military people's military professionalism. It always chafed me the wrong way compared to the way that the Galactica feels more like a biblical arc, crewed by imperfect people desperately trying to keep what little of their old society is still left going. The Galactica is like a character all itself, while the Pegasus for the most part just doesn't feel that way and is closer to background set dressing or a prop. Which is going to make people really angry when I say that, but hey, this is mostly an opinion piece with some facts to back it up, so, I mean, if you made it this far in, you signed up for Psy's wild ride, so buckle in, we've got more. And with those three main causes for the Pegasus being destroyed in a too long didn't care summary, it was doomed from the start by following the original's plot points, the brutal money-hoarding practices of producers, and the fact that it wasn't intended or acceptable by the writers to keep the ship around. It was always going to be written out of the story. The way they did it being to just blow it up, but the Pegasus was pretty much guaranteed to die from minute one, neck on the chopping block. And now, why it was a mistake from minute one to include it in the form we got. The Pegasus was a silver bullet for the Colonials, essentially the perfect hard counter to almost anything they would have been up against. The only way to keep things going as they were was if the Pegasus also brought along a huge uptick in the Cylon threat. Instead of 1 to 3 base stars jumping in to engage the Galactica, now it's 5 to 8 engaging both ships. And that kind of anime power scaling wouldn't fit the series and undermine the point of the toasters. They're not the bad guy of the week to be trounced as they shake their fist at you in defeat. They're a plot device meant to be a mirror of the colonials and a reflection of the worst in humanity. Genocide, paranoia, discrimination, hate, and most importantly, fear. A lot of the conflicts and story elements that pop up come from the Cylons being around while not directly present. The reveal of the skin jobs does an excellent job of stirring up paranoia, infighting, and fear among the fleet that our cast has to overcome and work through, and will come back to have huge consequences throughout the story. The Pegasus fundamentally undermines that because it's too strong, and when it finally does bite the dust, the audience is left feeling like they got slapped in the face and disrespected since the hand of the writer so blatantly had to come in and break the Pegasus back. No Vipers on board, skeleton crew, less effective automatic targeting for the guns and point defenses, flying into the center of like 5 base stars because Lamau tactics what that, not using the nuclear weapons on board for no discernible reason other than don't fire them, the blatantly emotional decision to come back and save the Galactica because his father was on board. It reads like bad fanfiction for how many things had to happen just right to put the Pegasus in a situation where it can't fight its way out. I think it fits the theme of making bad decisions and living with them that Battlestar Galactica likes to focus on, and I think overall people need to stop getting on Lee's ass about that, but the Pegasus was just done dirty and done wrong by the writers. If there was more ambiguity about the value of each ship, I believe the audience would have been far more receptive to the idea, because here's my take on it. What if the Pegasus was beat to absolute shit when it found the fleet? What if in the months of fighting and skirmishing with the Cylons under Admiral Kane had left the Pegasus battered, damaged, and maybe even partially crippled? An engine or two missing, a flight pod or two damaged or destroyed or inoperable because of the fights they've been in, the massive alligator head with visible craters, missing armor with warped battle-damaged segments? Really show that the ship has been through hell, and create the tone that while, yes, this is still a huge boon for the fleet, the reality is that the Pegasus has been and still is dying the death of 1,000 cuts. That way, when the choice comes up, the characters could argue for it and it would be a little more gray. The Galactica is old and in a state of stripped down capabilities, but it's mostly intact and functional. The Pegasus is vastly superior on paper, but it's taken nearly back-breaking damage and there's a chance the ship could just fail in the next major fight if it gets in any more big hits. Make the argument out to be between old and reliable, but new and risky, each with their benefits and failures. Maybe the Pegasus has some glaring weakness, like the nuke it took escaping from the Scorpia shipyards crippled the starboard defense grid on the fore of the ship, blew up the flak cannons and melted all of the smaller point defense guns. Hell, even during the power struggle between Kane and Adama, it would make more sense for Adama to be so confident that he can go to the phone and say, "I'm coming to get my men," if the Pegasus had already been beaten down and it was within the Galactica's weight range to potentially win a fight. Another argument, make hacking more of an issue. The Pegasus is networked, and while it has very powerful firewall systems and computers, it's already been electronically attacked twice by the Cylons. Once when they tried to execute the CNP on it when it was in the Scorpia shipyards, and it barely managed to get away from that one because it was in a state of maintenance, and once when it was successfully hacked by the skin jobs during the ambush from BSG Razor. If they brought up that the Pegasus has been having problems with Cylon electronic warfare, that could similarly make the case that it isn't necessarily the ship needed to protect humanity and could fail at the worst possible time. Overall, the biggest reason I think the Pegasus was a mistake is because when it shows up, it represents the worst storytelling mistake you can make. It's a deus ex machina. It shows up out of nowhere, solves a shitload of problems, single-handedly turns the tide in several big engagements that wouldn't be possible without it, and the issues and character drama it does create is just solved by a bullet to Kane's head. How in the flippity fuck the Cylon managed to get a gun, get to Kane, and kill her, all without running into a single guard along the way that was capable of stopping them, it's a bit of a joke, but it's fine. Literal character assassination aside, that pretty much sums up why I believe the Pegasus was a mistake and what the problem with the Pegasus is. It was added in a way that created more problems for the writer's plan, essentially turning it into a ticking time bomb that no matter how they dealt with it or addressed it was going to cause problems, and it could have been handled so much better. It could have been added in a way that was far more engaging, it could have been so much more entertaining with its implementation, and far more emotional and generally evoking of discussion when it finally did explode. And that's where I'm going to end the video. While I could go on forever about this, instead I'm saving the next part for a second video, going over a couple of changes to the story and a few different ways the Pegasus could have been altered to not only get the same feeling of hope and relief, but also fix the issues with how it exploded over New Caprica. I don't want to change the battle or keep it alive or anything like that, since I generally think the overall plot points and what different parts they wanted to hit along the way are perfectly fine. It's just for the most part the execution and implementation that was an absolute joke. Unfortunately, I won't be making that video next, as I have a few obligations to the channel patrons for what videos are going to be coming next down the pipeline, but it'll happen soon-ish, I guess, I don't know. And with that, we're done with a final plea to please subscribe. I want to hit the funny number. It's gonna be great to hit 20k. And we're doing like a question and answer thing with the patrons as the special for it. So, hey, that's another reason. If you want to join the Patreon, you can ask Cy and my co-host Steve any questions you want, and we'll answer them in a tell-all. And with that, we're done with a thanks to the channel patrons.